Wonderful. Once again, good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. And I would ask you to join me in welcoming our television and webcast viewers. And our program would be broadcast on Rogers TV in the days to come. And also, I'd like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online events base, and VVC for live streaming today's event. Again, my name is Danny Asaf and have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto for this 2015-2016 season, and honored to be your host here today. For over 119 years, actually, the Canadian Club has been proud to provide Canadians with this closely guarded, nonpartisan platform for the free and open exchange of ideas on the issues that impact our daily lives. Through our programs and our events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, joint events, and media and social media opportunities, we are always pleased to offer you dynamic political, social, and business figures, both from abroad and here at home. Before I take the opportunity to formally introduce today's guest speaker, I would ask you to provide me a short indulgence to tell you briefly about some of our exciting upcoming events. On May 31st, we're proud to host Isidore Sharp, the founder and chairman of Four Seasons Hotels and Resorts, who will receive our 2015 Lifetime Achievement Award. And on June 2nd, we're looking forward to hosting Premier Brian Pallister of Manitoba, who we're proud will take our podium on that date. To learn more about the Canadian Club and our events, please feel free to visit us at canadianclub.org, and you can also follow the conversation via Twitter at CDNCLBTO. Also, I would like to take an opportunity to express a special thanks to our event sponsor, TD Securities. Thank you. We would like to thank you for your generous support. As a non-profit organization, we can't hold these events without the support of folks like TD Securities. And also, I would like to thank Air Canada as our proud airline sponsor of the Canadian Club of Toronto for this season. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker. And as we all know, a lot of the news out of Alberta isn't very good, with the wildfires that have wreaked havoc on Fort McMurray, with the issues relating to pipelines, and of course, the low price of oil. So with these challenges, there has got to be some ray of hope and to look for opportunity. And as Canadians, and I'm sure every generation, feels that they are faced with certain fundamental challenges that are important for them to answer. So for Canada, we know that we need energy, and the world needs energy, and that is something that is a reality, one way or another. We also know that as Canadians, we have part of the solutions to our own problems and those of the world with vast and precious energy resources. We also know that we care very deeply about our climate and our environment. So the question for all of us is, this critical question needs to be answered. And we're not entitled for those answers to be easy. So then the question is, who and what organizations and institutions are going to lead us to the future and answer these questions? And Cenovus, as one of Canada's leading energy companies, is definitely one, under the leadership of Brian Ferguson, to take the lead. So a few things to note is, just in terms of its own community, a note here that Cenovus has assisted the emergency relief efforts in Fort McMurray with $230,000. We know other things about Cenovus, such as over the years, they have purchased since 2009, I believe, $1.8 billion of products and services from Aboriginal businesses. And we also know that they have been a very successful company up until today. And we also know that they have taken their commitment to their own employees very seriously, with freezing salaries of executives for 3 years, more than their employees and others. And people like Brian Ferguson have taken the lead on that. Brian serves, as you know, as the president and CEO of Cenovus since its inception in 2009. He joined Cenovus in 1984 and joined the management team as far back as 1994. He is a graduate of the University of Alberta Commerce Program. And in case I haven't mentioned already, I'm also from Alberta and proud to say an alumni of the University of Alberta and the Commerce Program. So it's a particularly proud moment for me here today to host him. He's also a member of the board at TD and a fellow of Chartered Professional Accountants of Alberta, and he's also been recently appointed to the Federal Minister of Finance Advisory Council on Economic Growth. Brian is also actively involved in professional organizations, in groups in his community, and for example, in 2001, he became the chair of the Calgary Police Foundation and has the distinction of being named Calgary's first honorary deputy police chief. And we thank you for joining us today. And today on the podium, he will also be joined by one of Canada's leading columnists, Margaret Wente of the Globe and Mail. And I will now cede this podium of record here to Mr. Brian Ferguson and Margaret Wente. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, Brian, there is so much to talk about. I'm not sure how we're going to squash it all in.
Well, we'll try.
We'll try.
I'll give you short answers.
Well, these are complicated questions. But well, let me start out with, I thought of you, I've been thinking of you all week. I thought of you yesterday when I got my Globe and Mail, and right there on the front page is a headline. And the headline says, oil sands cause major air pollution. And I thought, you know, the oil sands are, in a way, they're kind of public enemy number one right now in this country. And they're probably, you know, the most loathed industry around. That's, you know, that's actually a terrible thing for Canada, but it's a fact. And so when you get up and you see a headline like that, another headline like that, my question is, how does the oil sands industry get out from under that reputation and that perception that you are the bad guys?
Well, that's a very important question. You know, first of all, I would say that you know, we welcome in the industry, and we welcome at Cenovus, all science, fact-based research, monitoring on the environmental impact of the oil sands. That's how we improve. You know, how do we change that image? Because it's an image, and I would be delighted to sit down and have a discussion with anybody about the actual performance. To me, it's about performance, and I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, so for example, in Cenovus's case, we've reduced our emissions intensity per barrel by 30% since 2007. Set a target inside the company that we want to produce a barrel of oil without any emissions. We've set an interim target where we want to reduce our emissions footprint by another 50% by 2026.
Without any emissions?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I absolutely believe that oil can be part of a low-carbon future. There's a number of misconceptions which have resulted in the impression that you've described, Margaret. And you know, to me, you know, that's one of the things why, you know, I was one of the supporters with 4 other CEOs of the Alberta Climate Leadership Plan. You know, we not only, you know, what we were able to do is we sat down, there was a small group of CEOs that sat down with a group of environmental leaders in 2014, before we had changes in government in Alberta and in Ottawa, said, look, how do we break this logjam? How do we problem solve? How do we get to some common understanding? The aha moment came when what we started to focus on was it's emissions. It's not production of oil, it's the emissions from the oil. So Alberta is the very first jurisdiction that I'm aware of anywhere in the world that has actually set an emissions limit. There isn't any jurisdiction in the world. And the carbon tax that Alberta has put into place, the majority of the proceeds from that carbon levy are going to go into technology, the technology to address the concern, which is emissions. I've been a big fan in my career of, the most important thing I think you have to do is to have a good problem definition, define the problem or the issue you're trying to address, and then work on that. But if you don't have the right issue identified, then you don't stand a chance really of addressing that.
What I saw last November struck me as a really major pivot point for the industry. When you and Murray Edwards got up with Rachel Notley on stage and stood together and said, we're partnering with an NDP government on climate change and emissions reduction. It seemed to me that the industry had flipped at that point, realizing that you have to be inside the tent or else you'll get nowhere. But that struck me as an extraordinary moment.
Well, I think that's one of the fundamental attributes of earning the public confidence that we all need to be able to, and Danny referred to the abundant endowment of natural resources that we as Canadians have. To me, we have a huge obligation to develop those resources in a responsible, world-class manner, and I absolutely believe that we are doing that. I'll give you another example today. I talked about improving our performance as we go forward, eliminating emissions. Today, Cenovus' production from our oil sands actually qualifies for the low carbon standard in California. We're actually selling our oil sands production into California. And that's without further improvements.
Let me ask you this. I want to press a little bit more on this. Another piece of news. The National Energy Board reported on the Trans Mountain application. Here's a case where, to me, the problem is logic is all very well, but perception and emotion and those in the environmental movement who will never be satisfied by anything you do, under any circumstances, are a big hill to climb. So here's Trans Mountain, and it's done the application impeccably. It's had years and years of hearings, consultations. They've done everything right. The application is strong. The NEB comes out, it says, yeah, it's good. We've got a whole bunch of amendments here. And what happens? The Prime Minister pops up and says, oh, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. We're going to appoint an expert panel to do more consultations. Now, to me, the question is, and to Jeffrey Simpson and a lot of other people, the question is, how do we ever get to yes? How are we ever going to get to yes in an environment where pipeline decisions have become purely political?
So, as I mentioned, one of the things that we certainly welcome is science, fact-based decision-making, policy decision, legislation. It is unlikely on virtually any topic that you would raise in a democracy that you will get unanimous support. But what we have to make sure that we're doing is that we are addressing the critical science, technology-based, and societal concerns. And to me, that's one, I'll come back again to the climate legislation out of Alberta. That really is unique in terms of the legislation and the policy go forward, which I believe has actually started to change the dialogue and the conversation around market access, around the opportunity for us as Canadians to get any of our goods or services to global markets. This isn't just about oil. We've got to get our finished goods to global markets. We've got to be able to get grain to global markets. We've got to be able to get wood products. You name it, we've got to have access. And in today's world, the headline you read that you described in the Globe and Mail, I'll bet you there was 10 other headlines about something else that's going on somewhere else in the world, not just in Canada. And this is a global, we are in a global environment. We are a trading nation. We need to be able to, within a reasonable period of time, come to an informed decision that whatever the topic is, and let's pick pipelines in specific, that they can be constructed, operated in an absolute world-class manner. We have to address issues around marine safety, which are part of the 157 conditions and subject tos that were part of the NEB report. I'm absolutely confident that we can do that. If it takes, and what the federal government has done is said that they've created this tripartite panel, which will report by November of this year, and then decision goes to Governor and Council, which is Cabinet, by the end of the year. So we will have our answer. I'm optimistic. It looks
to me, though, that just that Mr. Trudeau is just trying to punt this as often as he can, so that he doesn't actually have to make a hard decision that is bound to disappoint somebody, because he's made promises that are contradictory. He has said to environmentalists, no, we're going to satisfy you, and he's also said we're going to get pipelines built. But once if he ever has to make a decision, he's going to have to spend some political capital on it.
Yes.
Do you think he's ready to do that?
Well,
I'll quote you.
That's what I'm afraid of. I've had the opportunity on a couple of occasions to have a conversation with the Prime Minister. He's been out to Calgary. I've had the opportunity to have discussions with our Minister of Natural Resources, our Minister of Finance, with our Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I believe that they all recognize, number one, the importance of the environment, number two, the importance of our economy, and that they are really two sides of the same coin, that we can absolutely develop these resources that we have in a manner that meets all of the best and highest standards in the world. We made commitments on climate change. That's something that all Canadians are concerned about. My company's done a lot of surveying over the last 3 years of Canadians, and climate change is something that is top of mind for Canadians. It is, and we share that concern. It's one of the big societal issues that we face today, and Cenovus intends to be part of the solution for that. And that to me is what we've got to focus on is solutions. To me, it is illogical. You've got this fantastic energy source, which is oil. And that's what distinguishes developed from developing economies, is access to affordable, reliable, and abundant energy sources. To completely leapfrog over oil and say, we're not going to spend some time, some effort, some dollars on addressing the concern which is emissions, both from production and consumption, that's illogical to say that we're going to just jump over that. I'm a big believer in technology. I'm a big believer in innovation. And we have, so to speak, put our money where our mouth is in supporting the climate legislation in Alberta. If I can't deliver on that technology, then I will wind up with a production limitation. But I absolutely believe that we can do that. We've got new technologies. The one that's really at the forefront with it, which I think within the next 3 to 5 years is going to have a dramatic change, is the use of solvents, which is a lighter hydrocarbon. Just a quick fact here, 80% of the oil sands are too deep below surface to surface mine. They're going to be recovered using a drilling technology of some form. That's all 100% of our activity in the oil sands is through drilling activities. We can and we will deliver in terms of reducing those emissions and developing that. You know, a couple of other statistics, and again, you come back, you know, so it's got to be performance-based. You know, I invite anybody who has the opportunity to actually come and see what we're doing in the oil sands. To me, that's one of the things that is critically important, is that our legislators, our elected officials, are in fact having access to the right factual and science-based information.
Important.
Yes.
And yet...
And I'm not going to guess as to what he's going to decide. I know what I would advise him.
Punt. And yet, it remains a fact, at least for the foreseeable future, that any increase in production, and Cenovus plans a big increase in production, oil sands production in the next little while, will increase CO2 emissions. There's just no way around that. And you got a whole lot of folks who say, nope, anything that increases CO2 emissions, unacceptable. Here's Jeff Simpson wrote a column this week too, and I thought of you. And he's written about this before, but his point is that there are so many people who have the power to say no, that getting to yes is almost, well, he would say almost impossible. They include fickle politicians who are always looking to get reelected, so they can't get too offside with the activists. And of course, you know, one of the big industry problems is that nobody's demonstrating in the street saying build more pipelines. It's all the other way around. You have fickle politicians. You've got Aboriginal issues, especially in BC, where land claims are unsettled. You have dozens and dozens of different Aboriginal constituencies that each one of which can say, no, not in my backyard. None of them are all going to ever line up and say yes all at the same time. You would have to say, for example, Jeff Simpson argues that BC, given that list of people who can say no, and the Aboriginal land title situation, which is a total mess, BC has got to be one of the worst places to do resource business in the world.
I'm not sure if there was a question in there or not, Margaret.
It wasn't a question. So that's Jeff Simpson.
Let me make an observation.
Is he being too pessimistic?
And I get accused of being a serial optimist, so I am an optimist. I think that we absolutely demonstrated when we started the conversation with this group of environmental leaders in 2014 that even if you've got different viewpoints, if you're prepared to sit down and have a discussion about what those differences are and define the real issue you're concerned about, that you can absolutely find a solution. That's one of the hallmarks of democracy. I think that's one of the hallmarks of Canadians, is that, yeah, we do recognize there are multiple interests. These are complex issues and questions, as you pointed out earlier on, but there are absolutely solutions. And the key thing to me is, how do we get to yes? It may not be unanimous, but if it is a vast majority, then, and we can demonstrate to those that continue to have concerns that the performance is actually there and that the issues they were concerned about are being, in fact, addressed, you know, that's how we move forward.
Let's talk about, we have an interesting question from the audience. Let's talk about Energy East. All these pipelines are controversial. Mm-hmm. Energy East, you know, maybe can't get built because of political opposition in Quebec. And the federal government is going to be careful with that one. Does Energy East have a chance, do you think? It's such a, to me, and probably to most people, it's you know, an absolutely logical no-brainer, but in this world where logic doesn't run things.
So
what do you think the outlook is there?
I think the answer is yes, it absolutely does. Mm-hmm. It stands more than a chance. And what I should also disclose is that Cenovus is and has made commitments to the Trans Mountain expansion, to the Northern Gateway Pipeline, to Keystone XL, and to Energy East. You know, we're of the view that we need a portfolio of options to get our product to Tidewater. You know, Energy East is one that obviously, you know, repurposing a portion of the natural gas main line to Montreal and then new build through Quebec to St. John. You know, this is an incredibly important and, to me, rational project for our country. You know, Quebec and Ontario imports something in the order of close to 600,000 barrels a day of oil that comes in the St. Lawrence Seaway from places like Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Nigeria. So we have the opportunity to displace those imports with Canadian crude that is produced to the highest standards in the world, as well as the construction, that jobs and the economic benefits of it. And I'm absolutely confident that we can satisfy any environmental concerns. And one of the things that I think we need to do, you know, I talked about getting the right stakeholders around the table. I think one of the big things that our federal government is focusing on is having a conversation with the provinces and getting the provinces together to look at the long-term economic growth. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I agreed to sit on Minister Morneau's economic advisory councils. I think that we need to figure out ways to continue to move our economy forward in the 21st century. And I absolutely believe that the natural resources we're endowed with are a big part of how we move forward over the medium and long term and in the short run as well.
No question. It's a matter of getting the message across to, I guess, the vast majority of ordinary Canadians who don't understand the technical issues. All they hear is the noise, and they're not sure who to trust. Big issue with that. Let me ask you another question. I don't know how much you want to touch this one, but you know, we also have a new...
You're going to ask me an easy question.
We have a new green policy here in Ontario, where I guess we're going to phase out natural gas, and we're all going to be riding around in electric cars, and unicorns will be frolicking in the back garden, and all kinds of other wonderful things will happen. Do you have any comments or observations on the Ontario Green Plan?
Well, I think Premier Wynne was actually in Edmonton yesterday meeting with Premier Notley. I think she also, if the reports I heard in the media were correct, she actually said there wasn't a plan to abolish the use of natural gas in Ontario. I think the most important thing was the fact that Premier Wynne and Premier Notley were actually meeting to talk about how we move forward and how we move forward with the clean tech solutions, whether that's to the use of oil and gas, whether that's on renewables. You know, how do we do that? In innovation technology, you know, and that's one of the things that I probably used those words several times so far, and I'll probably use them again here, but that is the way that we move forward. It is the 21st century, and science-based solutions to issues and challenges are the way of the future, and that's the way of our business. The oil and gas industry is a very high-tech industry. I quite often use the phrase that we're really a technology company working in the oil and gas industry, and that's the approach that we need to be taking.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And yet, it's still, the oil and gas industry is still characterized by so many people as part of our hewers of wood, drawers of water legacy, which is an enormous misconception. How do you get the message out that We're not just an extractive country.
Well, I think that's one of the great opportunities. You referred to our relatively new prime minister. We've got a change in government in Edmonton. You know, these are governments that I think have the opportunity today with the population to actually influence and change that dialogue. You know, now that they're in power, and that's one of the great opportunities that both of them have. We have majority governments in Edmonton and Ottawa for another 3 to 4 years minimum before another election. Majority governments can make policy decisions, and that's, to me, where it's really important that our legislators, our policymakers have got access to the correct factual information to make informed decisions. That's why we elect people in this country, is to make those laws and govern the country.
This is a very interesting question from Harvey Lamb. Thank you, Harvey. You've stressed that Cenovus is not just in the oil sands business anymore, but is also in the business of coming up with technological solutions to climate change by finding ways to reduce carbon emissions and invest in clean energy. How important is it for the future of your company to invest in clean energy? And how do you get that balance right between present and future goals?
So one of the energy products that I would put in clean energy, remember my statement that I want to be able to produce a barrel of oil without any emissions. I think, absolutely believe, that hydrocarbons can be part of a clean energy future and a low carbon future. We've partnered, for example, and set up a clean tech fund that's based out of Vancouver with the BC clean tech industry. Its focus is on commercializing technologies that will address not just production but also environmental issues as it relates to the oil and gas industry. We're one of the founding members of an organization called COSIA, which is the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Allowance, where 13 oil sands producers got together. We have agreed to combine efforts to improve our environmental performance. We have pooled $1.3 billion in IP that is focused on improving environmental performance. And it's focused on 4 platforms. One is land, water, tailings ponds, and the other one is GHGs. We have basically solved land, water, and tailings now as an industry, and our focus is on GHG. As I said, as a company, we're really trying to partner with like-minded companies in our industry, with academia, with young entrepreneurs around the world to address what you and I and others in this room do on a day-to-day basis in terms of the emissions from our lifestyles. And we can absolutely do that.
So environmentally responsible oil sands industry is the message that you were trying to put out there.
Environmentally responsible oil sands industry that can compete in today's low-price environment.
Yes, right. Yeah, let's talk about that for a bit.
Okay.
You have you said a month ago that this year, 2016 so far, for Cenovus has been among the most brutally tough or toughly brutal business conditions in a long, long time. Can you describe the landscape there and tell us if you see any let-up in sight?
Sure. I need to preface my response by saying every business, every industry will go through business cycles and will go through downturns. I don't need to remind people in Toronto about 2008, 2009. We are obviously experiencing a very pronounced and structural change in the oil industry. This is change that's happening around the world. It isn't just here in Canada. It's not just in Calgary. We have been, as a company, we've actually reduced our expenditures in terms of operating costs, G&A costs, capital by over $1 billion over the last 18 months. In the first quarter, my cash operating costs in the oil sands were under $10 Canadian per barrel. We've reduced our operating costs by about 40% per barrel. We're focusing on new structural changes, and this is one of the most difficult parts. And obviously, one of the things that's very front of mind for me is my shareholders, but also my employees. And obviously, shareholders have experienced a big downturn, not just in my stock, but in the energy sector, generally speaking, over the last 24 months. From an employee perspective, this is one of those things. These are decisions that are the worst decisions a CEO needs and has to be involved in, are staffing reductions. They're very difficult. They impact people's lives, their careers, their families, but they're necessary. I have to make sure that Cenovus is a company that has a cost structure that can compete against the marginal barrel supply in North America. And we continue to focus on ways in which we will improve that.
So I've heard over and over again from oil sands critics, including some of my own colleagues, that the oil sands are basically defunct because they can't possibly make money in the current cost environment. So they're wrong. They're wrong?
Yes.
They're wrong. Wow. Okay.
So I'll give you another data point here. So I mentioned my cash operating costs, Canadian dollars. Cash operating costs, transportation, royalties. I can cover all of those at a project level in $35 WTI range. As a corporation, I can cover all my G&A, my interest costs, all my corporate costs, all my production transportation costs today in about $45 to $47 WTI, and cover all and generate enough cash flow to cover all of my capital expenditures, is $1.2 billion, and my dividend as well. So I'm generating free cash flow in today's price environment. I believe that we will be in a more volatile price environment. By definition, OPEC isn't solving for price anymore. Supply and demand will solve for price. I think we're going to see more volatility. One of the strategies we have is to be integrated. We own interests in refineries in the United States. We own a unit train loading facility. So it's my belief that companies that can participate along the value chain can actually capture that volatility for the benefit of their shareholders and benefit of their employees as we go forward. Do we have to change in which the way we operate and run our companies? Absolutely we do. And we've got to be able to compete globally. And I'll come back to one of the topics you were talking about earlier was, how do we get projects permitted? So from a Canadian perspective, the opportunity cost to our country over the last 5 years has been about $40 billion in foregone revenue because we don't have access to tidewater for our products. That's another key component here to how do we generate competitive returns globally from our own resource. It's getting our product to tidewater. So it's cost is a big part of the equation. Pricing is the other big part of the equation.
It's an extraordinary business environment. I cannot think of any chief executive who operates with more stuff coming at him, from all over the place.
My hair used to be dark and I had a full head of hair. I have to say, pardon me for interrupting, but so this is my 8th down cycle, which means by definition I've seen 7 up cycles. So I expect to see an 8th up cycle.
Optimism helps. So what keeps you up at night? Is there anything that keeps you up at night?
So certainly I'm concerned about the impact on staff. Right now, as I focus on moving the company forward, and I really mean seriously moving the company forward from where we are today. We've made some very necessary and fundamental changes inside the company. My focus right now is making sure that I reestablish an equilibrium, an esprit de corps inside our company, that there is an exciting future for our shareholders, an exciting future for my staff as we go forward.
And one last question, or part comment, part question. Just give us a quick update on Fort McMurray, which I think, in a good way, was a real rallying point for Canadians. This much hated town, very symbolic place, but the way people rallied around, I think, was quite inspiring. So when will you guys be back to normal, do you think, up there?
Well, so it's a little bit of a moving target, but it's certainly within the next few weeks that production will be back up and running. What has to happen before you can start to move people back into Fort McMurray is you got to make sure that it's safe for them to go back, that they got the access to the goods and services. So you have to have the industrial and the commercial base back up and running, and then they're going to stage people coming back into Fort McMurray. You won't have 90,000 people going up all at the same time. The way you started the observation of the question, I think, was a fantastic one. It's been amazing to me as a Canadian to observe, the contribution. I mean, the donations that have come into the Canadian Red Cross, for example, are really, really phenomenal. Support by the country. This looks like it may be the largest natural disaster in Canadian history. To me, it's amazing that we were able to evacuate 90,000 people in a very, very short order without any significant injuries, let alone any deaths. One of the key reasons for that, I believe, is that you've got basically at least half the population of Fort McMurray that is trained daily in emergency response procedures and in safety. So again, that is one of the things that is core to the way our industry operates, is workplace safety, is process safety. And those are, I think, tangible examples of the responsible way in which we develop the...
So in a way, it really showed the values of the industry and the people that are at their best.
I believe so, yes.
Wonderful. I wish you all success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you.
In our brief remaining time, it's my pleasure to thank both Margaret. Thank you, Margaret, for your candid, your insightful and thoughtful questions. Greatly appreciate you being with us today and being able to help us advance this discussion. Also, thank you, Brian Ferguson. Thanks for outlining the problem, some of the things that we have at stake with metrics like $40 billion has been lost to our economy, and you start to think of how many schools and hospitals and other things that we value in our community that could be funded if we had access to that money. Also, interesting leadership in comments such as, you are a technology company in the oil and gas business, that you hope to produce a barrel of oil without emissions. So today, if the question was, does the future of the oil and gas industry have a role in a world where we want to see our climate preserved and enhanced, we are more confident today with your participation and your leadership that the solutions to those complex questions will be a possibility, a probability, and God willing, soon at hand. Thank you very much, Brian.